Welcome back, everyone. This is Larry Morris. This is session 3 of my set of videos on self-publishing on Amazon. And in this session, we will talk about basic detail formatting for a paperback manuscript. Some of the things we'll cover, should have already seen in more than likely session 2, where we talked about setting up the basic defaults for Word, but we're going to cover them again just in case you didn't go through that session. But a lot of these principles will work for whether or not you already have a manuscript that hasn't been formatted or whether you're formatting as you write. Again, in this case, we're going to look at a manuscript that hasn't been formatted. And I get this a lot of time in my services work when people will send me manuscripts that need to be formatted. And you can get a real quick idea of exactly how I go through this process and what I do. First couple of things I want to point out. One of them is at the top of your Word screen, you should see a toolbar that looks like this. If you don't, you need to add it. That's called the Quick Access Toolbar. And to add it, you can go over to the far right on your normal Windows toolbar and pull that arrow down. And you'll see something, if you don't have it, that says, I just turned it off, that says Show Quick Access Toolbar. And when you click on that, it shows up at the very top of the page. In order to update it, there's a very small down arrow right there at the end of that toolbar before you see the name of the document you're working on. Pull that down and you'll see a whole list of options. Down towards the bottom, click on More Commands and you'll see a large screen pop up that is the Quick Access Toolbar command selection box, and you simply click on the tools you want on the left and say add, and it will put them on the right where the toolbar is. The biggest reason that this is important is, if you'll notice, this little icon right here is normally on the home page in the paragraph section. It's called the Show Hide button, and oftentimes I will want to use that in situations where I'm not actually on the home tab, which is right here. For example, we're going to be in the layout tab today, and when you turn that tab on, you notice that Show Hide button is not anywhere around. So I like to have it available everywhere, and I'll show you what it does when we get to the actual formatting. But it's a good idea to have that button, as I do, somewhere on the Quick Access Toolbar. And the other one that always comes in handy, that's by its very nature, is defaulted as the very first tool on the Quick Access Toolbar, is the Undo button. So if you don't have that toolbar, it's going to be difficult to get to that particular button. And as I've mentioned before in several of my live sessions, that's my best friend in Word, because it will take whatever you just did and wipe it away. If you don't have that Quick Access Toolbar and you don't think you need it, but you still want the ability to do undo, there's another keyboard shortcut that will work that a lot of people use, is Control Z. That will undo the last thing you did in the document. So keep those two things in mind. The second major thing I want to point out is the way this normal command line is structured. There's a couple of things you'll notice on there that are kind of right in the middle, that are very small boxes, and they both have critical things in those boxes. And depending on the size of your screen that you're working with, you may not be able to see inside those boxes so easily. Windows will, and this works for anything on Windows, if you're working on a small screen, Windows will make every attempt to let the application minimize its footprint. And this is the way Word does it, by shortening these two boxes. if you're working with a large desktop normally with a large screen or with the large screen attached to your laptop, this may be what you see. And in this case, notice that the styles box is quite large and you can see the first three entries in it even. And the editing box is a little bit large and you can see everything in that. So keep that in mind. If your screen looks a little bit different than mine, it may be because your screen size is adjusted differently than mine and you're seeing a condensed version of whatever Word is trying to show you. Okay, let's get to the actual formatting process. And the very first thing I want to do is talk about how to set up, as we talked about in one of the prior sessions, how to set up your formatting options to actually get the job done. And we'll go into the Layout tab. And the very first thing we will get into in the Layout tab is the page setup there. And you'll notice that pull down that I mentioned before. If you use that, it will open up a large representation of the page setup, and you'll have three new tabs to deal with. One is margins, and as I've mentioned before, I usually run with 1-inch top and bottom margins, 1/2-inch left and right margins, and typically a 0.38 gutter. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, exactly how that works into the margins when we get to an actual formatting situation. The gutter position, a typical book is bound on the left side of the book, so normally pick left. If you're working with one of those different books that is bound on the top, which I'm not even sure Amazon does, to be honest with you, I don't think they do, you can select top. Select the portrait or landscape, the orientation you're going to work with, and the most important thing to get the margin set up correctly is click on mirrored margins down in the multiple pages section of the setup. And we'll talk about what that does when we get all of this formatting taken care of, all the controls taken care of, and we can actually start looking at how the text is formatted. The second thing is paper. The simplest way to set up the trim size, which is the paper size of your book, the book size, is pull the pull down and select custom size all the way at the bottom, and then specify your width and height manually. Most of my books are 6x9. Most of the customers I work with that I do services work for go for a 6x9 book. It could be 5x8. That's a very popular size nowadays. But set the paper size. And then on the Layout tab, the only thing I want to suggest that you click is different first page in the headers and footers section. And we'll talk a little bit about this one when we get to the actual formatting, and we'll talk a little bit about the first option, which is different, odd, or even. We're not going to discuss that today, how to do that, but we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, once all those three are set the way you want them, press OK, and you will notice that already some changes have been made to the document, and primarily margins and trim size are the two biggest things that get set up when you do the page setup. And the top and bottom margins, left and right, the gutter, and the trim size. Those are primarily the ones that get implemented right away. In order to start the update process, the formatting process, the very first thing we're going to do, and let's go back to the Home tab, is we're going to open up the Styles block, and that is done by clicking on that little arrow in the lower right-hand corner of the Styles block. And we're going to open that up, and we're going to deal with 3 styles today. And you can see there's a lot of them here. Most Word documents come with quite a bit of styles. You don't ever have to use them all. You only have to use what you what you need to do the particular formatting you're working on. And if you go into the options down below where you can manage styles, you'll find out that there are hundreds of styles that you can set up, and they come in extremely handy for automatically or near automatically formatting a manuscript. The first one we'll look at is, and by the way, if you'll notice, this entire document that I opened is set up in Times New Roman 12 point, left justified, and it's typically got single spacing, and there's a large amount between the paragraphs, a large amount of spacing, and the paragraphs are indented quite a bit. So that's not quite the way I usually set things up, but we'll talk about how to change that long term. The way to change, and by the way, this particular document that I opened up, all of the formatting in this document was done manually, meaning the person who did this document, and it was me, and I'm doing it for this example, obviously, did not use styles at all. And what that entailed, obviously, is clicking on a paragraph and setting the font and the type size and the justification manually and not having anything to do with styles at all. And that's known as manual formatting. And there's something you really have to watch if that is in flight, because manual formatting in most cases will override a style, and it gets a little complicated sometimes. And you'll notice, to show an example of that, I have a paragraph down here that rolls over into the next page that the entire paragraph's in italics. So the very first thing we're going to do is set up the normal style to reflect what we want the ordinary text to look like in this book. And to do that, you don't click on normal, you hover your mouse over it and click on the right mouse button, and you'll get a box that pops up. Click on modify. Then you will get a style box that pops up that has a lot of the same things in it that you normally see on the word command line. This is how you establish what you want to consider, in this case, the normal style. So we're going to set it up as Bookman Old Style, type size is 14, and the justification is justified. It's not left justified, it's right justified. This is what Windows just calls justified. And you'll see that when we're done, because if you notice, this particular manuscript right now is left justified. That means the right is very ragged. Some people like that, some people don't. I typically go with complete justification, and we'll show you what the difference is. The second thing to look at in this box after you get all of these set is pull down on the lower left-hand corner of the box, pull down the format, pull down, and you'll see lots of different things in there you can work with. And the only one we're going to play with today is paragraph. But I would encourage you to experiment with this concept of styles, because you can do so much automatically. What we're going to change are two things. One is we're going to leave, first of all, we're going to leave the indentation alone, at least the main indentation, because what that implies is indents that are in addition to the margins you set up. What we're going to work with is a special indentation, and we're going to set that to none. If you want the paragraphs indented, specify first line and give it a value. What this manuscript was set at when it was formatted was first line and the size, or by half an inch, 0.5. If I do indentation at all, I'll do first line and 3 because I think that looks a little bit better. But most of the time I do no indentation. And also we we talked about how the distance between the paragraphs in this particular manuscript was quite large. And it is 8 point after. So what I'm going to do is change that to 4 point. That's about half the space we have there. And I thought this was single space, but it isn't. What we're going to set ours to is, if you want single space, line and a half, double spacing, they have entries for those. If you want an odd size, like I usually run with, 1.15, because that's a little bit more than single spacing, just to give you a little bit more room, and it makes it a little bit visually attractive to use that. So we're going to set that as the normal indentations and spacing. Go to line and page breaks, and the only one I would recommend you set in this area is Word orphan control. That lets Word make sure you don't have, for example, a single line of a new paragraph at the bottom of a page and the rest of the paragraph is thrown over to the new page. There are also all kinds of other options in this area that you can investigate with Google searches and play with and experiment as to how Word is going to change the formatting of your document if you use those. So that's the only one I would recommend clicking is Word orphan control. Click OK, and then click OK on the main style format. And notice nothing's changed. That's because this document was not created in the quote unquote normal style. It was manual formatting, so it's not going to change yet. Now, as to how to get this document changed to that style, there's several different ways to approach it. If you have a document that has lots of different styles, that you want to use lots of different styles, you can always work at the paragraph level. For example, by putting your cursor at the beginning of a paragraph and clicking on the style you want, and in this case we're going to use normal because we just updated it, and now notice that whole paragraph has been updated. It is now justified on both sides, left and right, and there is no indentation at the beginning of a paragraph. Now that's one way to change that. And before we go any farther, I'm going to undo that by clicking that undo button up there. The second way to handle it is to do multiple paragraphs at once. For example, let's take all 3 of these paragraphs, highlight them, and then click on the style that you want, and it'll change all 3 of them. And if you'll notice also, the space between the paragraphs has been updated. It's no longer 8, it's now 4. And sometimes that may not look as enough of an indication to you, so you may want to play with that as you move forward and doing your own formatting. That's another option. One caution I will, and let's undo that. One caution I'll mention is if you have character definitions like bold, underline, or italics that you want to preserve, and remember we have a whole paragraph here that we want to preserve. Interestingly enough, Word will preserve manually overridden character formats like bold, underline, and italics if you include the paragraph they're in a lot of text. Like in this case, I'm going to say I want to reformat all of this text, and in fact we can do the entire document. Let's do the entire document. Start there, go all the way down to the bottom of the document, and hold down the shift key and click at the end. And now let's go back up at the top and watch what happens when I click on normal. I want to apply this style to the entire document. And notice that the italics for that entire paragraph has been preserved. Now, once you have a style applied, and notice what it did also was when we applied the style to the entire document, it actually changed all of this up here to reflect what was in that style. One of the nice things about using styles is that once you have it established and you have the entire document formatted the way you want it, you can click on that style, and let's right click on normal and click on modify and bring that familiar modify box back up. Go down to the bottom, pull down format, click on paragraph, and then change the indentation to 3/10 of an inch on the first line. Click OK and click on that, and notice it changes the entire document. Everything that was defined in that style gets changed automatically. So that's a very powerful tool in Word, is using styles. And notice I didn't highlight the top of this when I highlighted the entire document, so it was left alone. It's not part of this reformatting down here. Now let's talk about headings. Those are the other two things I would recommend that you use styles for. Notice I have two, and let's format this first. Let's get this formatted to normal. Okay, now we're talking about the same thing. I have two different heading styles in this sample document. One is a single heading 1, I would call, and the other is, in some cases, I have a heading 1 and a heading 2. And heading 1, I already have defined as Bookman Old Style type size 18, and nothing unusual, just a few different before and after spacings. And I'm going to eliminate the indentation on the first line. That way it'll be properly centered, because notice I have centered specified in that paragraph setup. So let's click there and click on that to OK it. Now if you put your cursor on the first line of that heading and click heading 1, it changes that heading. Or you can put your cursor anywhere in the middle of the heading and click on heading 1, and it will still change the entire. It considers this single line a paragraph, by the way. And that's how styles work in this case. Heading 2, I'm going to right click on heading 2 and click on modify so we can look how that style is defined. I have Bookman Old Style, type 16, centered. It's a little smaller type size than the other one. And if you pull down format, the part I want to bring up is click on border. And if you'll notice, I have a custom border selected. And I have a size for that border, 1.5 points. And on this configuration over here, this lets you click on top, bottom, left, right, wherever you want that border. You can decide whatever configuration of lines you want, and I just have the bottom line clicked. So what that gives me, when I utilize heading 2, is again, put the cursor where you want the heading 2 and just click on heading 2. You get the same kind of definition, the same type size, but now it's underlined with a nice crisp underline. Now that is basically how to do the manuscript, the body of the manuscript formatting that I deal with all the time, and it's very simple to do. Sometimes it's a lot more difficult and time-consuming because the documents I get may have a multitude of different styles because they were started with a template, and that's probably one of the most confusing things you can do. It's much easier if you just start with a plain document instead of someone else's predefined template. Now let's look at real quick. I mentioned before how that show hide button comes in handy and why it's so good to have it on the quick access toolbar. When you click on that button, you will see the hidden characters, hidden formatting characters that are used in Word. And primarily today we'll talk about two. One of them is a paragraph marker, and that's what looks like a paragraph. And if you'll notice here, we have too many. I don't want that much space between paragraphs, so I'm going to delete that one and delete the second one. And then here we have a page break, which is really in the wrong place because I'm going to, in this particular case, where I have the page break, I don't need to insert a physical page break because the way the page flowed, it just happened to wind up with a break where I wanted it. And I'll show you how that gets you into trouble in a minute here. But notice if you go further down, I do have a page break here because I want it to break before I have the next footnoted section. And notice here I don't have a page break. So I want to get rid of this paragraph marker. To insert a page break, put your cursor where you want the page break and go up to the tabs on the main command line and click on Insert. And what you want to insert is a page break, which is right there under the word Insert. So click on Page Break and it will drop one in and force what is after that to the next page. The difference between page break and blank page, and keep this in mind, is that a page break will simply start what you have the cursor on the next page. A blank page command will insert a blank page and then start where the cursor is on the following page. So you'll actually get a blank page inserted. And sometimes that comes in handy. And then again, we have a page break at the bottom here before I start the actual chapter. And then a little bit further down there, if you'll notice, there should be a page break here, but there isn't. So I'll get rid of that paragraph marker and insert a page break. And there's a page break here before the actual chapter starts. So we can turn that off again. Now let's get to the home page or the home tab and turn that off. But that comes in handy so you can see where all of the paragraph markers are. And notice on this particular page, I even have some extra paragraph markers that I really need to eventually get rid of. If you turn it back on again, you'll see a lot of extras here that I can get rid of between paragraphs that I don't really need. Now let's talk about simple headers and footers, and then we'll cover some last details about margins. And we can get rid of the styles block. Let's close that and turn the show hide off. Now headers and footers, and we're just going to talk about simple headers and footers. There's two ways to get to the header and footer control. One of them is to click on Insert on the Insert tab on the command line, and you'll notice it opens up. That's where we did the page break again. Go over quite a ways into that tab and you'll see header and footer. Whichever one you click on, you're going to get up a large box, and you want the one that says at the bottom that says Edit Header. Now what that's going to do is open up the headers. Interestingly enough, it also opens up the footers. It seems that no matter which one you pick on Insert, header or footer, you get both. So don't worry about it, that's the way it works. Now let's close that. The second way to handle defining headers and footers is wherever you want to start the headers and footers, and it's usually in this area. It's going to be in the area where your top and bottom margin is. Simply put your cursor there and double click in that area, and it will open up the headers and footers. For the header, I'm simply going to put in book title, whatever the book title would happen to be, and you can control how this is oriented by putting your cursor in front of it. And notice here, you're in a different tab right now. You're in the header and footer tab. We're going to go back to the home tab for a moment. And you'll notice that this header, book title, has been centered. You can right justify it and see what happens to it. You can left justify it, or center it, or you can, using spaces and tabs, you can put it anywhere you want to. So, but notice our header and footer tab heading that we have opened has not gone away, and the color has shifted, so we know it's still open. So we're going to go back to that tab, and we're going to look at these controls. And remember, when we set up the margins, I said the only one I would recommend right now that we're going to talk about is different first page. We'll just mention odd and even footers in a moment, but different first page, typically the first page of a book doesn't have a page number. So I'm going to get rid of that down in the footers, and I'm going to move over to what will now be page 2. And I'm going to pull down page number up in the upper left-hand corner and say current position, a simple, and the first block is a simple number. And notice Word now will number those pages for you automatically. If you want, for example, different information on even and odd pages, the way to do that is to click on different odd and even pages. And that does have its complexities, but it also gives you a lot of freedom. What most people want now for books is they want the title of the book on the left-hand side of a left-facing page and the author name of the book on the right-hand side of the right-facing page. And in some cases, instead of the title of the book over here, they want the title of the chapter. And that makes it even more complicated, because that introduces different sections to the book where you can have different formatting characteristics for different sections. I'll cover that in one of the very last miscellaneous sessions that I put together, where there's a lot of different things that are covered in detail. But we're not going to get to that at this point. We just want to cover the basics. Now, once you have the header you want and the footer you want, close the header and footer, and they stay up there, notice. Now, let's talk just for a couple minutes about margins and gutter before we close this session out. Back on the Layout tab, when you first set up the page setup for this document, I said typically what I do is a 1-inch top and bottom and 1/2 inch inside outside and a 0.38 gutter. If you set that up that way and specify mirrored margins, what Word is going to do is take this gutter amount that you've specified and add it to the right-hand margin of a left-facing page and the left-hand margin of a right-facing page. And that area right there constitutes the gutter of the book. And it only works in Word if you specify the gutter size independently of the inside and outside margin and specify mirrored margins. And notice what that does is give you a larger margin on the inside of the book than on the outside of the book. This is important because what we want to make sure is that when the book is opened and the customer is reading it, we want to make sure they don't have to break the spine to actually be able to comfortably read what's on the fringes inside the interior of the book. Now, the second thing is the margin calculation, particularly in the header and the footer, top and bottom of the margin, and how the placement of the headers and footers is affected by that. The margins that we specified, and we talked about 1 inch top and 1 inch bottom, and if you're doing this on Word, you can actually, if you have a big enough screen that's normal size, you can actually measure that, and that'll be 1 inch, top and bottom. That is the distance, the margin you specified is the distance from the top edge and the bottom edge of your paper to where the print is. In this case, it's the edge of that heading, and in this case, it's the bottom of the last paragraph. When you specify, and let's get to the layout tab again, where we looked at these two values. And you will also see these two values duplicated on the header and footer command line. You can change them in either place. But what this specifies is the distance from the edge of the paper to where the header and the footer starts. So this is a 1/2 inch in, and this would be a 1/2 inch in. And that's the rest of the way. So keep those in mind. If you specify a larger value here than you did for margins here, you're going to confuse Word because you've told him to move further into the margin with the heading and footing than the margin is large. So he's going to get confused, and I'm not sure exactly how he's going to handle it. So keep those two things in mind. And again, as with any of the videos that I produce, my email address is here. Again, if you have questions on what we did on this video that you need more clarity on, or you have questions about things we didn't cover, which is fine, then go ahead and email me and I'll get to it as soon as I have the time. But I thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next session.